Thank you, my brother. We always do say we're brothers from another mother because I've lost my brother to death, you know. So to have a brother in my life that I can really call my brother, it's great, you know. We've walked this, we truly are brothers in so many ways, and so it shows the. Before I can get to proactive grieving, I talk about in our life in grief, we have collateral blessings and we have collateral damage. We have collateral grief. We go down the road every year when there's an anniversary date or there's a wedding or there's going to be a graduation and your child did not get to graduate or did not get married. You grieve that loss all over again in every way because it should have been. Like the Kenny Chesney song, Who Would You Be Today? It constantly rings in your head, who would you be today? But like Alan is an example of the collateral blessings that come into your life. Blessings come into your life because of the loss. We can't change what happened, but we can embrace the blessings that do come our way, and it can enrich your life and give you the hope that we've lost for so long, that we want to have joy again. It's hard to even think about having joy again when you've lost somebody, especially a child in your life. The most devastating loss of all, the most egregious loss to try to wade through is the loss of a child, multiple children. Some people have lost 5 children. We go to conferences and they wear buttons and you see someone come up with 5 buttons and it drops you to your knees and you may have 2 buttons yourself, but you realize the huge loss that they suffered. Can everybody hear me all right? So I call this proactive grieving. You can see I've got the couple faces up there. I'm also an artist and I do portraits of children, mostly children who have died for families. And I've also did a series of drawings called The Many Faces of Grief, which is 20 different images that I put into right there. They're all right there. 20 different images that represent different components of the grief journey. And I put them on the front here, turning loss to legacy. When we first have that face of shock, when the loved one in our life dies, whether we hear the news, we know it, it shocks us from head to soul. Then the peace that we can finally gain by turning our loss into legacy, embracing it. So I'll give you a little history first of my losses and why I'm here today. I never intended to be a grief speaker, or I was talking to Marilyn to have Alan was kiddingly, I don't have a PhD, and I said I have a PhD. And I said, well, I'm practicing human being. But Marilyn says, no, you're a doctor of bereavement. Yes. So I'm going to add that to my name. Who's going to dispute it? It just, you know, like, well, I only could say KFC. PHB. So my losses started young. I was 15 years old when my father passed. And it shows that was my first experience in grief. And in the grief journey, we learn from our parents and our family and those around us and how they grieved. And we emulate what they did. So when we have a loss, we do what we taught. We have they don't teach grief in school. They don't teach you how to handle bereavement, and I think they should. If you'd be in school, you'd still doing it, right? You could get that class going, couldn't you? Retired. But when my father died when I was 15, I was getting ready to go to the 4-H horse show, bringing my horse to show him, and I'm getting all excited. 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'm ready to go to the horse show, and I see my mom coming down the driveway. We out in the country, a lawn driveway, with 2 neighbors holding her up, and I'm going, something is wrong. My dad was in the hospital having triple bypass surgery. And I knew then something had gone terribly wrong. My mother didn't hug many people. And to see her like that, she looked so disheveled and distraught. They came up and my mom said, honey, your father has died. You are the man of the family now. At 15, the youngest of 7. You have to take care of the farm and your sisters. And she goes, would you go please tell your sisters? I go, oh. So I had to go wake my sisters up, which I always had to do to go to the bus anyway. And I go down and wake them up and tell them that Dad had passed. And I didn't cry. My mom she said those words, and I took them to heart. And I did not grieve. I did not cry. I was the man of the family. Big boys don't cry, right? So I did not grieve. I just put it away. I was in high school. I went back to school. I yucked it up with my buddies at the funeral. My dad was a police officer. He was buried in his blues. But there wasn't a lot of sympathy in 1969 for police officers. And so I became school. I just kind of became the class clown so people wouldn't talk about it. You know, I didn't want to be pointed at. And so I just became the class clown. And I lived that clowning around I'm still doing it. And but that's what I learned early on, is just you laugh it off and you disguise your grief and you don't go through it. And my mother is good Nordic Minnesota stock. If anybody's from the Minnesota stock, you buck up and you get over it. You don't show your emotion. You keep it inside. You don't share your secrets and your laundry with the neighbors. You keep it inside. You get over it. My mother had a child that died at birth with a cord wrapped around his neck that I didn't even know about it until my son died. When she said that, she didn't talk about it. Didn't even know his name. I found out I had a brother named John. I had no idea. So that was my first experience with grief. And then after I learned, was processing that, I had a brother, David, who was in a state hospital his whole life. He had cerebral palsy. And back then, they just threw you into a mental hospital. So he grew up in that environment his whole life. And then one day, my mother had moved to North Carolina, and I got a phone call from the state hospital saying, "Could you please sign for your brother's body? It's at the University of Minnesota." I said, "What? Oh, didn't the hospital call you?" He said, "No." I was my only name in the phone book. So that was my second death in the family, was my brother, who I didn't really know, except once a month on Sundays we'd go up and visit him, and we never talked. He never talked. He wore red Chuck Taylors. I love Chucks to this day. But he had the same pair his whole life in that hospital. So when he died, we had to have a funeral for him, but no one would have a funeral. Do you think that would be hard to do, to try to find someone to have a funeral? Because he didn't belong to a church. I finally found a good old Irish priest in the town of Hastings. And he says, "We'll do it for you, lad." And he's got a good last name, Carmody, so that helped. So we had a funeral for my brother, quick funeral. And then we went across the river to Prescott, Wisconsin, and to a piano bar, and we had an Irish wake. And we partied, and we drank, and we laughed, and we celebrated that David was free of the confines of the prison that he was in his whole life. That he was actually free, not stuck in this hospital, just being forgotten. And so that's my second experience. First, you buck it up, you get over it, you don't talk about it, you bury their legacy in their life with their body. The second time, we celebrate that he's dead and he's gone and he's in heaven. So, wow, that's different. So that was my second process. It was joyful. It was a celebration. And that was when I was probably 23 years old when my brother died. And I had just gotten married. My high school sweetheart. We met at 15. We're still married today. Grief does not tear a marriage apart, contrary to what you may hear. So we were happily married, had a little house. I bought a house when I was 18. Yes? Yes. Okay. And so anyway, I got a call when I was 28. My twin sister and I had celebrated our 28th birthday together. As a twin, you celebrate your birthdays together. Boom, 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 boom. Every year we always celebrate our birthdays. She had chocolate cake, I had angel food cake. And so we were different as night and day. I was goofus. She was goofus, I was gallant. If you ever remember the High Life magazine. And so that's what, I got this call that let me back up. We had our last birthday party together. We had a birthday party, and she said, "Mickey, maybe next year you're going to turn 28, 29. I'm staying 28 forever." A week later, she and her boys were killed. She was going to see a movie, The Cross and Switchblade. She had both her boy, her 9-year-old, and her 7-year-old with her. And she had a set of boy-girl twins at home, 18 months old. Dad was staying home with the twins. A truck crossed the highway, center median, and destroyed their car. And she and the boys died immediately, killed at the scene. where another woman and her child in the car walked away from the scene. We questioned that for a long time, how and why. But that dropped us. We said, oh my God, now whatever I learned before did not work. I cannot just put this away. There's no way I can celebrate it. There's 3 people in our family were gone in a blink of an eye. And it was a very different service. There was no wake. There was no caskets. It was like they just disappeared. So it was very difficult for our family to assimilate that loss. But it didn't take, after that, a couple months after that, my son was diagnosed with cancer. So I couldn't even grieve and process my sister's grief because I had to try to fight to save the life of my son, which I did. We did everything we could do. We moved across the country. We lived in Mexico and Ensenada for several months, and he had a miracle healing down there. He survived that. Cancer came back, and he ultimately died December 1st, 1987. That loss I could not get over. I learned to live with those other losses. And my mother kept telling me, buck up, Mitch. Why are you still grieving? Put it behind you. I said, Mom, I did that for almost 5 years. And finally, I walked by the picture of my son one day on the wall, a great big picture that's on the front of my book, but I had it on the wall, and we used it at the funeral. I walked by it, I looked at that picture, and I just dropped to my knees and started bawling 5 years down the road. And I said, I need you back in my life, Kelly. I can't live like this anymore. I can't live gray. I'm an artist. I can't paint. I can't write. I can't do anything. I'm just an automaton. I'm just functioning at work. And I can't live that way. I'd like to have joy. I like to sing. I like to do things. And I can't stand living this gray. So I said, Kelly, I'm bringing you back. I'm going to start a new relationship with you on a non-physical level. Because I had asked him for a sign, and he gave me one. So I know he survived death. That brought me back. Otherwise, I was collateral damage. I was living a gray life. So I brought him back into my life. That's when I started grieving proactively. I brought him back, started a new relationship. I brought him back into my life. I use his name in the first person. I don't say I had a son. I have a son. I have a daughter that's living, and I have a son in heaven. But it really empowers you when you start using the first person and not say I had, I have. And that is proactive grieving. That is trying to turn loss into legacy. So those are all the losses that set the foundation of where I'm at today and why I do what I do. So we're going to go through some of these slides on what is proactive grieving. It's embracing your grief. Taking ownership of, as Alan says, become the CEO of your grief. This is the rest of your life. It's living with the loss, not delaying it, not postponing it, not hoping it'll get better someday. It's living it, expressing it, embracing it, going through it, not postponing it. We can tend to postpone it with drugs, illegal or prescription. We can tend to postpone it by magical thinking, like this is not really happening. But we need to live the loss. Process it every single day. We have the rest of our lives to do it. There's no time clock on grief. It is your own personal journey. And it can be a long journey. It is a lifetime, not measured in months, not the drive-through mentality. 3 days off, get back to work, you're doing okay. 3 months down the road, a year down the road, you should be well over it, right? People think that. Oh yeah, a year down the road, yep, you're over it. And people look at me now, they've given up. And 25 years ago, 25 years you've been grieving for your son, you're still talking about it? Aren't you over the top in your grief? Haven't you found closure? No. Closure is when you close the casket. Closure is not closing on their life. And so we are charged to take that life and live it with us, make that as a partner in life, and turn that loss into legacy some way. So we learn to become an intentional survivor, that I will survive this, and not a collateral victim. That poor me, I'm going to stuck, this is horrifying. A lot of people go through experiences of loss in their life. We all have losses in our life. I kid people sometimes, you want to cheer up, watch Schindler's List. Look at the devastation that someone did at Schindler's List. Viktor Frankl said to get through grief, you need to set goals. He survived the concentration camps. He lost his whole family, his wife, his children, his aunts, his uncles. The whole town he lived in was wiped out. And he survived. just by setting goals every day that I will survive. I'll be an intentional survivor. We see the grief has really changed through the country. Back in the day, you'd see people would have the wake in the home. They would have the body on the kitchen table for 3 days. And it was in case they wake up. That was the thought back in the day when they didn't know potentially this person maybe could wake up. So they have the wake at the home. People come to the home and you wear black and you mourn. The Jewish community has been doing it forever. They call it Shiva. They come and sit a whole week with the bereaved. They sit in Shiva. You're not allowed to do anything. Shop, change clothes. I mean, you can you wash your hands and your face, but they take care of you for a week. And then they do it for a whole month. And then for a year, they have a memorial celebration after a full year. So they know the community embraces the grief. That is proactive grieving, and it's been around a long time. It's just that we transitioned from those days of processing and wearing black and wearing pins and honoring our loved one by our mourning to packing it up and getting it over with in 3 days. This drive-through mentality. So we're reaching a middle ground now, and I see the paradigm shift happening in this country, that we're embracing our grief, we're living our loss, we're talking about our loved ones. If you look at kids, if there's an accident in school and a child is killed in high schools now, you see on the cars, R.I.P. Has anybody seen those? You've never saw that years ago. R.I.P. was a scary thing in the graveyard. These kids mean it. Rest in peace. They're honoring their friends. They're having candle lightings at the football field. They are keeping in contact on Facebook. I miss you, bud. It's your birthday. So, how you doing in heaven? Say hi to the big guy for me. Kids are embracing the grief. So we're learning from them. Not to put it away like my mother says, get over it and buck up. No, we embrace it, and our life can be enriched by doing that. The paradigm shift is happening, and it's a whole new perspective. And we have to take off what we knew before and look at a whole different way. It's like putting on your spiritual glasses and looking at life in a whole different perspective. Remember the movie The Dead Poets Society, where you get up on the table and everything looks different from that perspective? And that's what it is in the grief community. We're looking at it in a whole different way. It's not going through stages. Everybody's heard about the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages? DABDA, denial, angle bargaining, depression, acceptance. That's been around forever. But as most people know now, that information was for those who are dying. She did work with the dying. They went through those stages. I went through those stages when my son was diagnosed. I saw my granddaughter go through it when the dog died. Oh, I can't believe this, blah, blah, blah. You go through these, but that's initial. That is not down the road. But those steps were applied to the grieving process. And even Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a friend of ours, Lynn Prashant, was with her months before she died. And she said, Elizabeth, I just want to talk to you about the 5 stages. And Elizabeth said, who was dying of lung cancer, and she was smoking a cigarette, and took a big drag in a deep German Swiss accent and said, when are they ever going to get over those 5 flipping stages?